By the end of this video, you will know about the aorist indicative active of ἀποστέλλω, πίπτω, φέρω, and a few other interesting verbs in the Greek New Testament. Hi, Rob McIver here. Let's start by looking at the aorist of ἀποστέλλω, πίπτω, and φέρω. Now here are the aorists of ἀποστέλλω, πίπτω, and φέρω. They are ἀπέστειλα, ἐπεσα, and յանεγκα. Each one of these is interesting in its own right. Starting with ἀποστέλλω. It's an example of what we call a liquid verb. And in my Intermediate New Testament Greek Made Easier, I've listed the principal parts of liquid verbs that are found in the New Testament. You can see that all of them have an interesting intolerance of a sigma, and avoiding the sigma makes changes in the verb. For example, ἀποστέλλω, which is apo plus stello, becomes ἀπέστειλα. So the elusa, the e at the beginning of the weak aorist, is there, ἀπέστειλα, but stello has turned to styla, to avoid the sigma, but to show that it's the aorist, not the present tense. Piptω is ἐπεσα. Now, this is interesting because piptω changes its root in the aorist, and verbs that change their root in their aorist are normally strong aorists and use strong aorist endings. And it is true that piptω does in fact use strong aorist endings in moods other than the indicative moods, like the infinitive and the subjunctive and the participle. But in the indicative mood, piptω uses the weak aorist endings, and it goes ἐπεσα, ἐπέσες, ἐπέσεν, etc. Φέρω finishes with a rho. Verbs that finish with rho show changes as they form their aorist tenses. So φέρω becomes ἐγένετο. Now, what pattern are these verbs going to follow? Well, they have a choice, don't they? They have the endings of the strong aorists, which end with on, s, n, omen, eti, on, or the endings of the weak aorists, which go sa, sas, sen, sam, and sata, sam. Now, from their endings, ἀπέστειλα, ἐπεσα, յանεγκα, it's clear that as far as possible, these verbs are going to follow the weak aorist paradigm, well, except for using a sigma. So ἀποστέλλω goes ἀποστέλλα, ἀποστέλλες, ἀποστέλλεν, etc. ἐπεσα goes ἐπεσα, ἐπέσες, ἐπέσεν. յանεγκα, յանεγκα, յանεγκας, յանεγκεν, յանεγκάμεν, etc. You already know what I'm going to say later when it comes to tips, don't you? To get from ἀποστέλλω to ἀπέστειλα, we must memorize. I'll come back to that. While we're talking about interesting verbs, let's look at three aorists that occur quite frequently in the New Testament. And they're worth learning now because you're going to meet them fairly often when you are translating from the Gospels. So, what do you think of our first example there? eῆπαν. Yes, it's the third person plural aorist indicative active of lego. Hey, but I thought that was eῆπαν. Isn't lego a strong verb? Well, thank you for asking. Yes. Now, it is found 95 times in the New Testament, so this isn't somebody's mistake. But every so often you can find a weak aorist ending on a strong verb. That is a feature of Koine Greek, the Greek of the New Testament times. eῆπαν has this advantage, though. Unlike eἰπαν, it can only be third person plural. eἰπαν can be first person singular or third person plural. So eἰπαν is nicely unambiguous, and it just means they said. Now, ἔλεγεν is not strictly speaking an aorist, but it's also from lego, and you can see that it has the ἔλεγεν form, which is familiar from the strong aorist endings. In fact, this is the third person singular imperfect indicative active. Now, there is a difference between the aorist tense and the imperfect tense, usually. And there is actual debate amongst New Testament scholars as whether there is actually any difference between eįpαν and ἔλεγεν. Well, ἔλεγεν, it's going to be he said rather than they said, but eįpαν or ἔλεγεν is very similar in meaning. So you might as well learn it now, eh? You're going to recognize that it's he said anyway, and the ending looks right. It's going to be right. eįpαν is found 95 times and ἔλεγεν is found 71 times. So it's found often enough that you're going to meet it often. Ἀπεκρίθη is a passive aorist. It's a verb that doesn't have an active voice. But again, ἀπεκρίθη is found 82 times, often in the gospel accounts, and it's a verb worth knowing now, even though you haven't officially met aorist passives at this stage. And ἐγένετο, oh wow, this is a really, really interesting verb. It's used in a situation which mirrors the Hebrew way of saying, well, this is what happened next. Kai ἐγένετο means it happened or it came to pass. The verb ginomai means, well, become, come into being. But kai ἐγένετο, and it came to pass, or this happened next, is something that you'll find fairly frequently in the New Testament, and you'll see that ἐγένετο itself is found 195 times. And not only that, it is, as it says there, a strong aorist indicative. And this means, as you know, that it's actually irregular. It's used often enough that it would be worthwhile learning it now. Now let's think of ways to make understanding the aorist tense of interesting verbs easier. Yes, you've got it in one. My first tip, my second tip, third tip, fourth tip, all of the tips really are rounded up in this. Memorize them as vocabulary items. Once you have them in your memory, they are easy. If you don't have them in the memory, well, they're not just not easy, they are not possible. And my second tip, as usual, is practice. And if you're looking for a place to practice these verbs and recognize them in the context of other weak and strong aorist verbs, you will find an exercise in chapter 16 of my book, Beginning New Testament Greek Made Easier. This video is one of a series of videos on the grammar of the Greek New Testament. And among the videos are several on tense and the aorist tense in particular. And you may find them interesting. You can most easily find these videos by subscribing to my YouTube channel, NT Greek Made Easier, or by following me on x.com at McIver 2024. And hey, if you found this video helpful, why not let me know by clicking on the like button below or by clicking on the heart icon. Thank you.